Hi, this is Jack Downs. I'm here with the first class of JOU318 page design and layout for those who couldn't make it to class today. I have some content to cover. I hope you watch this video all the way through, and there are a couple of little things due for next class, though nothing to really get that concerned about. So let's go ahead and go through the content as I will do it in class. First of all, we've got the Brightspace page as you're looking at now. Very critical here. The daily schedule is a page I will show most days, and you go to the daily schedule itself, and you'll see that what was due today was nothing. What's due next class is I'm asking you to read in the textbook. You should have the textbook now or soon. Don't have it quite yet. That's okay. I'll show you where I've got the first reading for you. There's a Let's Talk Pages assignment, which I think is pretty easy. Unfortunately, if you weren't in class, you didn't have the opportunity to take newspaper pages from me, so you're going to have to find a newspaper. An actual broadsheet newspaper, like the Press Republican at Stewart's or somewhere or around. And you actually have to have one that you can tear up, so not just find one in the library. Also, what else? There's something called Brightspace Intro assignment, which is introducing yourself, and then the prop wheel reading. And that reading will continue into the next class as Chapter 1 continues for the next one. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some of this stuff. I'm going to go back here. So that's the daily schedule. It's where we always find all the assignments and what's due, what's going to be due, and so on. The syllabus summary is here too. Before we go to the assignments, let's just take a look and see. You do need the Newspaper Designer's Handbook right away, very soon. You can get it in the different places. It's also in the library to get going, but I really suggest you have your own copy. You're going to need a thumb drive, USB drive, also very soon, a flash drive of some kind, to save digital files. Some of these files don't work that well moving through Google Drive, so that can be an issue. So I suggest you get a flash drive. It doesn't have to be dedicated to this class, but you have to have a moderate amount of space on it. We're not going to use a gig of space, I don't think, but you're going to need a proportion wheel. What the heck is that? You can get one at the bookstore, but it is a this is what they kind of look like. They're a sort of let me see if I can get that into it's all backwards here, isn't it? Yeah. So it's kind of a wheel device that we will use for measuring photographs, and just for the first few weeks. Not very expensive. I do have some extra ones, but hopefully you can get one. And there's different size ones. It doesn't matter. It can be small. It doesn't have to be big. The size does not matter. And a ruler. I mean, it can be just a basic, any old basic ruler. I like the kind of more official typesetter's ruler, but it could be any old ruler. And a pencil. You need some pencils for drawing some things for the first few weeks in particular. So you're going to need those. That's what you're going to need. And what else? Strongly suggested a binder to organize your work. There's a lot of handouts, grades, quizzes, and homework, sub-projects, and multiple. The finals were 10%. There's a bunch of quizzes and homeworks. Some things might be worth more. I do accept late work, but we're going to lose -10 for each class something is late. And attendance will be recorded. Attendance is critically important in this class. I think in all classes. So even if you don't have the homework done or you don't think you're ready, still come to class. And there are, yes, if you're really sick, you can document it. Let me know. Yes, ideally, though, attendance absences to be excused should be notified in advance about it, especially if it's a prearranged sports excuse, notified in advance. I don't generally do makeups for quizzes and stuff, but quizzes in this class are going to be a little different. I think they'll mostly be take-homes. But at least your assignments are still due, even if you're out. But most important thing is to stay in touch. Participation, as you know, in general, yes, sure, that's good. Behavior, no texting. The use of phones in the classroom is a problem for me, so please don't do it. you could lose points. But if you need to use their phone in the classroom, like because you got a sick roommate or something else, just let me know ahead of time. Cheating, there's no AI tools been used in this class whatsoever. So fabrication, plagiarism, copyright violation, all those are extremely bad in this class. The schedule I showed you earlier is something called Jack's Journalism Lounge. Let's not worry about that right now. Anyway, so that's the syllabus summary. The full syllabus is also here, which I'm not going to review for you, but I'm going to hold you to everything in it. So please do take a look at the full syllabus for the course. So what are your assignments to do and so on as we move ahead here? And then I'll do a little presentation. So I'm asking you to do a Brightspace intro assignment. And I will actually attach the actual assignment piece of paper to the email you receive with this video. But all you're going to do is go to the other class, resources and links, and then go to the student forum. And then you're going to answer this question, welcome to the class, take a minute to familiarize yourself with Brightspace, to the schedule and so on. And then I say, please respond here with some basic information about yourself. Don't tell us anything you don't want us to know, but this is to fulfill that Brightspace welcome assignment here. That's all you do for that. Okay, good. Introduce yourself, in other words. Good. Okay. What else? There is something called Brightspace. I ask you to do some reading. Harrower, Intro through 16, which is our textbook. And then, come on, slow computer. And then the prop wheel reading. Okay. So let's say you don't have the textbook yet. Hopefully you get it very soon, but you're waiting for it or something else. Okay, good. So if you go to other class resources and links, so go to class handouts and resources. Class handouts and resources. And you'll see these are where you're going to have things. These are the handouts in class. Like the Brightspace Welcome assignment is here. Early in design practice. Oh yeah, I got to remember to show you that too. And talking pages assignment, which is something else which is due. And then there's other things which we haven't gotten to yet. Sure, but way down here is the resources for InDesign assignments. I may change the name of that because this is actually a link to a Google Drive which has a number of things on it. Yes, InDesign assignments, like I'm going to give you some stories and some photographs and stuff to use in an assignment. That's here. But also the little bit of extra of reading, which you don't have to, in advance of having the textbook, is here too. So if we go into the readings folder, you can find textbook chapter 1, the textbook introduction first, right? And then the prop wheel reading, which is actually not in the textbook. Some of it comes from an older edition of the textbook. Some of it is just stuff I put together. So this is prop wheel and then how to dummy. You'll see I ask you first for next class to read the prop wheel and then the how to dummy comes afterwards. But it is there. But I'll be handing it out in class 2 and have a hard copy for you. But you missed today's class, so that's where you can read it. All right, what else do we got here? So I want to show you the Google Drive, which you can access it through resources for InDesign assignments, which is mostly that's what you'll use it for, but some other things too. Do spend some time looking around here for other things, like how to use a proportion wheel. What the heck is this thing about? There's a video there. How to dummy a page. There's a video there. These are some InDesign intros exercise. There's a video there. These are videos I made. Some of them I made a long time ago. This class was actually the first class I ever taught. And I actually built it as from that. And it's been changed since then. It used to be only newspaper design. Now it's newspapers and magazines. And that's what we're doing, newspapers and magazines. But first starting with newspapers because that's the most basic and moving on to magazines. And what else? I suppose talking about those general things, I will also tell you, why do you care to learn newspaper magazine design? Well, it is something good to know. Surprisingly, there actually are still jobs out there. Newspapers are still being made, and if you go to work for a small newspaper, having the ability to actually design pages also can be a plus. You can say, yeah, I can write stories, I can edit stories, but I can also design pages. And a lot of small newspapers, that's something that can give you an advantage on getting a job. And although, yes, the traditional print media is struggling, there's still more jobs in traditional print media than there are in other kinds of media. And magazine work is probably even more restricted, but it's still, out there, and the skills you have for magazine design flow more naturally over into newsletters and other graphic design. So that world is more connected to other kinds of things. And remember, there's still a lot of in-house public relations and communication stuff in making newsletters and in-house magazines for all kinds of large corporations and stuff. So these skills are still important in those ways. So that's my little pep talk for that. Let's go back to the course home and remember what the heck I was trying to tell you about. We did those things, class handouts. Okay, yes. I have something called Talking Pages assignment. And this one is, it says, it reminds you of the reading. And the handout I'll be giving everybody. But I ask you to find 2 newspaper pages from a broadsheet newspaper. This is a full-size newspaper, not a tabloid, which would be like the Daily News or the New York Post. A full-size newspaper, like the Press Republican, the New York Times, or some other newspaper, USA Today, whatever. You got to find a newspaper. If you were in class, I offered you newspapers. Anyway, it must be a real piece of newsprint, not a printed sheet. Write a short analysis of each, like a graph or 2. You know, what? 4 sentences or something. Describe what you like or dislike about the page. It's okay to dislike a page. Try to find a page which has little or no ads on it. All right. So I don't want to just have a big pile of ads. I want to have actual content that someone designed there. Having some ads on the page is fine. So look at the design, the structure, the visuals, the typography, the news judgment. Not just whether you like what the page is about. Like, I like sports, so I picked a sports page. Well, hopefully there's more to it than that. Your analysis may raise questions like, you may not have the vocabulary and the skills yet to say what this is. So maybe you want to ask in your analysis, maybe say, I wonder why they did that. That's okay too. Be prepared to talk about your ideas, to show your page, to talk about your ideas in the next class. You need to type and print this, I'm afraid, on paper, because I want you to attach it to the actual sheets of newsprint that you are relating it to, and hand it in class. It is due next class. And then the first reading is mentioned here. I mentioned reading the New York Times. I do not think I'm going to have much in the way of current events quizzes, but I strongly encourage you to read the New York Times, which is free to you. An online subscription is available. And I ask you to bring a proportion wheel, ruler, and sharpened pencils to class beginning next week. Class is beginning next week. Okay, good. And what else? That was that. You got some reading to do. You got this little assignment. You got the bright space assignment. There's something called early in design practice, which is kind of instructions on how to get going on InDesign. We're not using InDesign this week, and probably not even next week, but very soon. Those of you who have spent a lot of time in InDesign, maybe you don't need to do this, although it still be useful. So you can start to learn some things about how we're going to use InDesign. Those of you who have never used InDesign before, wow. Okay, you really need to get some practice in ahead of time. And perhaps practice with me directly. Like maybe I need to work through this with you, as it will be in class with some people potentially. So read this over. You can give it a try. You can find InDesign. Don't go by the program unless you really want to have it. But I strongly suggest instead you use InDesign in the lab. For instance, the lab here, like in 115, which is where a class will be. So that's a good place to practice too. But that room is often open to you. So this is some InDesign practice to get you going. Not an assignment, but it's something critical to get you going on InDesign. And for those of you who haven't used InDesign, I think you may need help getting started on this, and then you need to practice it like a number of times yourself. The more time you spend with the program, the better before we get into it in class itself. Because then we're going to move quickly through it. So that was the early InDesign practice. Showed you the reading. I think that then I'm going to just go into another little thing here. Let's take a look at a little presentation. Okay, just kind of get some overall view of looking at newspaper pages, since we're starting with newspaper pages. Let's get rid of that. Okay. This, by the way, is a compilation of page ones from President Obama's first inauguration, which was a huge moment, and of course did not happen that recently, but the idea that newspapers everywhere did special things on their front for that day, and it was interesting to look at those pages. But the idea of like how we look at pages and what pages represent to us is what I'm going to be talking about here. Looking at newspaper pages. Looking at newspapers. So how do we look at newspapers? Well, we might be looking at newspapers from the point of view of a reader, because hopefully you become a reader of newspaper pages. Many readers just use a newspaper for little bits of things they want. If you think about it, the amount of content in a newspaper and the small amount that it costs, it is a great bargain. Even if all you want is the advice column, the comics, the obituaries, the big story, the sports scores, box scores from baseball, whatever, the ads for deals on things, coupons, all those things. Those are all valid ways to look at newspapers, looking at it for what you want, right? Another way to look at newspapers, though, is you could look at them based on the circulation size. You could have a very large circulation newspaper, more than 1 million, like New York Times, or the Opelika Auburn News, a tiny newspaper in, where the heck is it even? I even forget where the heck that is. I think it's like a few thousand circulation newspaper someplace. Arkansas? I don't know where. Anyway, these are old pages, it's true. But that's the idea. That's one way we can find distinctions between papers. How big is the circulation of them? And there's huge differences in circulation between the little paper in your little town and a big international paper. Or you can look at some really large circulation papers. There are some papers in Japan, for instance, and now in India, where there's actually a growth in newspapers in some of these markets. And in some of the case of some of the Japan papers, they have like millions and millions of subscribers. So it's still a huge business on paper newspapers in some other places around the world. As actually in Europe, it's still doing pretty well too. You could take a look at papers from the point of view of how attention-getting are they, right? So you could say, look at the New York Post. This is an old copy, but still same applies. It's very much a marketing front as it's trying to get attention with the screaming headlines and often really clever headlines too, and usually very impressive images, sometimes gory images. So it's really just screaming at you. Or there's something like the Wall Street Journal, which speaks in a much more reserved tone, and we do think of them like speaking to us, kind of. Or maybe you think about how big is the news day? How about 9/11? It was an enormous news day, as there's been so many since, right? Or there's days which are just average work news days. You might have an international story, a local story, you might have some regional story and some basic stuff in a pretty photo, and that's it. So there's huge news days, and then there's normal news days. That's another way we could look at pages. We could look at some papers. There's still some papers that are black and white only, and then we can look at some papers which are bright color. We could look at the shape, the size and shape of the pages themselves. I mentioned earlier a tab or tabloid, which is a small size newspaper, theoretically made for commuters, and a good example is that we would see around here would be the New York Daily News or New York Post. Chicago Sun-Times tab newspaper versus Chicago Tribune, a broadsheet. The full size or large newspapers are broadsheets. You could have a kind of a sexy newspaper in some parts of the world. It's very common. Or you could have a serious newspaper. These are newspapers from Latin America. So as page designers, though, Some people call us page designers. Some people call us production copy editors. Some people call us paginators. Some people call us presentation editors. Some people call us reader designers. Boy, there is all kinds of terminology for the people who make pages. But as for people who do that, we look deeper into the structure of newspapers, the structure of the pages, and the whole structure the whole publication is built on, the architecture that the reader travels through. Imagine it like kind of like we are engineers or something, or contractors or something. We're trying to build a path to take a reader through a publication, getting the most information and getting the things they want in the easiest way. Readers may only be subconsciously aware of some of the architecture that we create, but we still do it to try to get the readers used to the what things mean, what different size headlines mean, what different size photos mean, why certain things appear in certain pages, certain places, certain presentation, giving them cues to what those things are. Is it news? Is it opinion? Is it sports? Is it a review? So even though they don't consciously realize this architecture a lot of times, they feel the impact. And they know if they're journeying through a newspaper, through any publication, this applies to magazines too, they know if their journey through that publication is sensible, methodical, or if it's confusing and chaotic. So that is our job, is to try to build a path through the information in a way that keeps attention, gives good information, makes it a reasonable and sensible journey, and makes readers feel good about it at the end. And some of the things we do, they don't consciously realize that that's what we've done, but that's what we try to do. So another way we could look at newspapers more technically is we could say, how are the stories separated? This is an older copy of the Press Republican. I think it's a page that I did. And then, because I made pages at the local newspaper here for decades. I literally did thousands of page ones. And in fact, I made pages just this past weekend. I still work there one day a week. See these rules here? They are separating the content, which then appears in box-like modules, we would call that, modular units. The rectangular units that is each story, kind of separated. And the stories themselves tend to wrap around the photographs or other things that work together with them. Or this is rarer these days, but we still do see some newspapers that don't use these rules in between things. Instead, we'll use a boxes around some things and not around others to separate things out. So we're always trying to tell readers what goes with what and what doesn't go with that thing. We could also look at the grid as we look. This is getting a little more technical now, right? Like how many column grid is underneath the thing. Right. So this newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, at this time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns across. Those are, we call them legs of copy. So yes, that's a 4-column photograph in a 6-column format. So they're kind of like relative terms. They do how many columns are in your grid that you're using to design. Everything's always on a grid. But we might have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. A 5-column grid on this paper. We could look at, is it very much a traditional structure with a dominant piece of art and normal stories on the front, or is it mostly a page one which is all little tidbits and refers to other things, a refer-oriented page, which I think is rare these days. But for a while there was a trend in lots of refers on page one, references to stories that are inside. We could look at, is it modular or non-modular? Most newspapers today are modular. In other words, everything appears in boxes. This is another box which is inside a bigger box. Things that go together are together in these boxes. I mean, when I say boxes, I mean rectangular units. Rectangular units, right? On the other hand, we have the New York Times, which frequently is not modular. In other words, we have stories which one story is pushed into another story, right? And this is what we call this a dog leg layout. That one little place there where they are not separate units. The old time newspapers were extremely not modular. In fact, pre-electronic composition, digital composition tools for making pages, of course, the copy was actually just kind of laid on a page or kind of like filled in from the top. This very old newspaper, ancient, that's maybe going a little too far, on what was a big news day, you can see how one story moves into another story, and they are not all in separate units, rectangular units. You could say, is there dominant art or no dominant art? Traditionally, we like to have a dominant art in every page, a story which is a photograph, which is at least, it's almost always a photograph, could be a graphic, which is at least twice as big as the next in square area as the next photograph on the page. But this one, you could say this is kind of a graphical unit, but it's actually got a story and a headline as part of it. So I would say there's really no dominant art on this page, but this one definitely has a big piece of dominant art. You could look at the actual width of the piece of paper, right? Papers in general used to be much wider, and they've gotten quite narrow. But not all of them. There are still some really wide web. We call that web is the width of the paper that is actually on the press. Wide web newspapers, as this New Zealand newspaper, is still very large. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are still 8-column wide newspapers, but they're rare. But we tend to have much more very vertical papers now. Why? Because we've been cutting down on the amount of paper we try to use. And by making it narrower and narrower, we can try to save money. So newspapers, as we speak, in web width, they've shrunk over the past 10 years. I would say more than the last 10 years, or the last 25 years. They keep shrinking. So they've gone down inches in width. So you can also look at the best papers in the world. And are these some of the best papers in the world? In one year's contest put on by the Society for News Design, these were some of the best papers in the world. And still notice that, yes, that's an interesting dragon graphic. But they're still just text and images and maybe graphics. But the graphics themselves usually are not so incredibly complex. We're still dealing with 2 dimensions. And we're dealing with basic things, but we're dealing with balance and art, really, and the really best papers. And it's not unusual these days to have the best papers in the world be from Europe, as that tends to be where some of the best paperwork is being done. I want to get to that link. I'll get to that link afterwards, which is the most recent contest. You would see that actually there's, again, some of these same newspapers are winning it. Although on digital papers, U.S. papers are doing a little bit better. But Europe is where some of the best designed papers in the world are now. Have been for some time, actually. We kind of lost ground to that. So that was the best papers. What about the worst papers in the world? There is no worst papers in the world. The job of your newspaper designer is clear communication of information. We energize it. The communication of it. We create visual context. But that's the whole goal here, right? But not one size doesn't fit all. New York Times may be great, but it probably doesn't work in your community for your local readers as their only source of news. They need their own newspaper. Every market, every audience is different. And what works in one place doesn't work in another. So any day of the week, every newspaper can be the best newspaper in the world. It's quite available to us. And potentially, I suppose, the worst. But I don't think there is any worst. We are constantly working every day, another paper, every day another paper. We have 2 inflexible constraints, time and money. Our deadline's coming daily, and it's true, our staffs have been continuing to shrink. But still, there's people out there, and maybe some of you in the future will be out there making newspaper pages, and also maybe writing and editing for those pages too, as we think about newspapers. All right, so that was the first class for those of you who missed today because of travel or one thing or another. So thanks for attending, and try to get going and as I suggested, and look at the attachments which I'll include here.